Hello, everyone. Great to have all of you here watching live or watching a recording. My name is Yaroslav, Chief Learning Officer at OpenExO, and today we have a special guest with us. I was looking forward to this. Her name is Kamalis Lardi, and I'll get her to introduce herself. But the topic of today is very exciting because in EXO we speak a lot about technologies and transformations, and it's often looking at the technology side and what it can enable for the companies. But actually, at the end of the day, at least so far, there are humans involved in any change that any organization needs to do. And I think actually I would go as far to say, and probably Kamalas would agree, that humans are a crucial component for all of these bigger technological visions to manifest and to happen. So I'm very excited for her to share lots of her experience. She's been working with organizations. I think she wrote 2 books now, if I'm correct, 2 books, and has been working for over 20 years helping companies to handle the human side of change, but also obviously advise them on the technology transformation and digital transformation. So Kamalas, I'm going to hand over to you for a quick intro, and then we can get started.
Thank you very much, Jaroslav. It's a pleasure to be here today. So when we talk about the psychology of digital transformation, I'm going to touch on 2 aspects, which is the brain aspect as well as the mind aspect, so the psychology aspect. And hopefully I'll cover some of the fundamentals that we are using in our daily business that have been incredibly effective in digital transformation. So let me first maybe do a quick introduction for people who don't really know me. I've been part of the EXO community for a number of years. My core background is really in digital transformation and technology implementation. And my journey in tech started in the mid to late 90s, and I started off as a coder, actually. So back then, a lot of what I was doing was really trying to understand the nuts and bolts of technology, the hardware and software and those kinds of elements. But my passion quickly grew into this aspect of how technology can transform industries and impact businesses. And so I started looking at management consulting. That's when I joined, management consulting and business advisory. So I've been in that space for over 24 years now. And I was also the head of digital for one of the big 4 consultancies here in Switzerland. In 2012, I launched Lardi & Partner Consulting, which is based in Zurich, Switzerland. And since then, we've worked on over 50 digital transformation-related initiatives and projects across industries and across the world. So although I'm a technologist at heart, I became very intrigued with this human aspect of tech, or the human element that can drive, make or break technology implementation. And this started very early on. And I'd like to share a quick story about, probably that can pinpoint where this started for me. So it was the year 2000. I was in a consulting engagement for one of the big 4s, and we were working for a corporate client, and our task was basically to implement SAP at the time for one of the basically the accounting module for one of these departments. And so after the design, development, and workflow development and so on, we implemented a pilot initiative. And one of the things that we noticed after a couple of weeks of running the pilot was the efficiencies and productivity gains that we were hoping to see from automation and from digitization were not there. Actually, people were taking over double the amount of time and effort to complete the same work that they were doing before. And so, of course, our consulting team got into hot water with the leadership, and we had to do a step through to try and figure out what exactly was going on, why the system was not working, were the workflows not designed properly. And so one of the things we identified was that the people who were using this new system, they were not bought into the system and they didn't trust the new system. So they were doing the day job in their old way, using Excel sheets and their old workflows and old processes. And then in the evening, they would actually do data entry on the SAP system. And so this actually doubled the amount of time needed to complete the work. And so this was a defining moment for me. This was 24 years ago when I realized, oh my God, people can actually make or break the success of any technology implementation. Now, since then, it's been, as I said, 24 years. I've observed similar experiences across probably every client engagement that I've worked with. There are statistics that state from McKinsey's and Gartner, over 80% of digital transformation and tech projects either fail or they fall short of they fall short of reaching their intended outcome. And so implementing digital transformation without this human aspect is really like putting skates on an elephant, right? It can get really dangerous for a company and it can derail any plans that you have. And so one of the things that I find so impactful is to understand that there's this knowing and doing gap in organizations, right? Companies, they understand that we need to do things in a different way, but somehow we keep repeating the same way that we're doing things, implementation of projects, technology implementations, digital transformation strategies. We keep falling into this same trap. And for over 2 decades, I've observed this. And so what I did was it triggered me to actually write the book, The Human Side of Digital Business Transformation, because I wanted to, first of all, capture methodologies and frameworks that could be used to accelerate transformation in a company, but also to what I had to do was also to rewrite the playbook, more or less, around how do we incorporate this human element in technology implementations to make sure that we're not forgetting this core piece that is so necessary for organizations. And so before I move forward, I'd like to maybe make a quick definition of what I mean when I say digital transformation. For me, and the definition that I often use is it's an organization-wide evolution or transformation that leverages technology solutions to capture, create, and deliver value in the market for customers. Right? So this really looks at a holistic organization-wide change and application of technology that prepares the company to survive and thrive in the digital economy. And so in the context of OpenExO, this really can relate to core initiatives, which are, existing elements within the company, doing what you do better, applying technologies to be more efficient, to be more productive, to lower costs. But also it includes core edge initiatives that allow organizations to be innovative, to find or to use emerging technologies to create new business opportunities for future of the organization. So it does include both elements of core and edge. And the work that I've done over the last 12, 13 years within Lardi and Partner Consulting really does involve both of these elements. So we all know that digital transformation can have significant benefits for organizations, right? And we often see this information around cost reduction, better customer experiences, competitive edge, rapid global reach. There's so much exponential potential that can be realized when you implement emerging technologies and technology solutions within an organization. But we often overlook some of these negative impacts, particularly in the current day and age when we see generative AI and we see AI being so exploding across industries, its application being exploding across industries. So we're seeing probably every organization that I've spoken to in the last 2 years is implementing some form of Gen AI or AI initiative to digitize and automate, lower level tasks, redundant tasks, less complex tasks, and allowing employees to basically work side by side these technologies and become more productive and focus on these human interactions as well as more complex tasks. But what I find consistent across organizations is the negative impact of digital transformation and tech implementation almost being either forgotten or overlooked or underrepresented. And this can have a huge impact on the sustainable success of any initiative that you're implementing. We are seeing consistently when we go into digital transformation, we have to shift roles, you have to create opportunities to learn new skills, engage with digital literacies, rapid change. All of this results in a higher level of stress for the workforce, as well as lower morale. And if it's not well managed, this can have a huge impact on the outcome of transformations. And this is why we're seeing a huge number or the higher rate of digital transformation initiatives failing or not reaching its intended goal. Now, in my experience, if you incorporate this human element in your transformation initiatives, you can actually avoid this performance dip. And you can actually drive higher quality, lower your costs of implementation, and you can stop. Some of you may have had this experience where you have projects that have started and then stopped and then restarted and then stopped. I've had many of these experiences where we worked with companies and we said, look, you've gone through this process many times before. Let's reset and start all over again, and let's really do it right with the human element. And it can have a huge impact, not just on the leadership and management level, but across all of the workforce or all levels in the organization. And this is very familiar to the EXO community. This is something that we see quite often around corporate immune system, where if you bring something new ideas, new innovation, new initiatives, whatever it may be, there's a immune system within the organization that pushes to keep the status quo. We've always done things a certain way. We don't want something new. It could be a good change or a bad change. It doesn't matter, but we do the things the way we do it. And this it's not just the way people work, but it could be systems that have been put in place that resist change. It could be governance structures. It could be processes, whatever that may be. Now, this element intrigued me very much, and it actually inspired me to dive deeper into specializing around the topic of neuroscience and how the brain works. Because I wanted to understand beyond this entire organization structure being, having this corporate immune system and pushing back, I wanted to understand on an individual level, why do we as human beings find it difficult to face uncertainty and change? What is that biology in us that prevents us from accepting innovation, for example, or accepting something new within an organization environment? In my studies, I found two things that were quite interesting. First of all, I was intuitively doing things the right way, aligned to the science. So that was very nice for me to figure out. And secondly, I found that there's actually a brain code which can provide us a sort of playbook or a map that allows us to increase success within digital transformation. And so these are some of the brain codes that I'm going to be covering today. The first element is, let's take a closer look at the amygdala response, right? The first element is really around understanding that the brain is not a rational element. We as human beings, we often say things like, oh, I'm very rational, I'm a rational thinker, I'm a logical thinker. There is brain science and neuroscience and brain research that's basically disproved this. We as human beings are actually emotional creatures, right? Emotion rules the way we behave, the way we make decisions, the way we adapt, the way we engage with one another. Emotions create our experiences, and it drives people into action. So understanding this emotional level, understanding how it impacts the way we think and behave, can help us drive human action in a transformation initiative. So there are two primary emotions that the brain focuses on: pleasure and fear. So pleasure basically says you are in a good situation, you are safe, you are secure, you are in the best position as a human being to survive and thrive. And the fear aspect is when the brain tells you there's a threat to your survival, there is a reason to be afraid, and you need to react now to ensure your survival moving forward, right? So the brain basically is an organ in our body that manages these two emotions. And what it does is basically it budgets energy and resources to ensure that we are able to go more towards pleasure and avoid fear in order for our survival as a biological creature. Now, understanding this is very important because it relates to the amygdala. The amygdala basically relates to the fear aspect, right? It comes back to that fear element. And it's a neural network that's located in the subcortex, lower part of the brain. And basically, every single external stimuli, it could be information, it could be communication, whatever you receive as a human being, it goes through the brain as an electrical message. And it moves along two paths. The first and quickest part is it reaches the amygdala and basically says, there is a threat, you need to react to this threat in order to survive. The second part is then the same information, electrical message, goes into the cortex, which is the upper part of the brain, that basically then adds additional information, sensors, additional content that comes into us, combines these with our experiences, our emotions, our physiology, and basically assesses and deciphers the message to say, is this really a threat? The information that goes to the amygdala is quick. The one that goes through the cognitive process is slower. And this is why we often have people reacting very quickly to information. So if you think about it, the amygdala assesses the threat. It ensures there's a correct reaction. It activates the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the one that's responsible, or it's the collection of neural networks that's responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response, right? And it tells you basically you are in a threat situation, you should run away, or you should freeze, or you should fight this threat. And it also releases a certain hormone called cortisol. And as you know, cortisol is the stress hormone, but it prepares the body to react. So if you need to run away from a threat, it prepares the body for this burst of energy that you can actually run. So how is this relevant to a business environment with digital transformation? Let's take a scenario. We have a person named John who comes into the office one day and walks over to the coffee machine, and he's taking his early morning coffee. His team lead comes up to him, Becky. Becky is flustered, and Becky says, "Hey, John, I just heard a rumor. This new digital transformation initiative that they're implementing is going to result in some layoffs. Some of us are going to lose our job. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know who's going to be impacted, but it's going to be in the next few months." So John's amygdala is immediately activated because this is a threat to his survival. He's going to lose his livelihood. And so he immediately reacts and he starts to think about this. He goes into this cortisol mode where he's stressed, he's unproductive. And the longer this lasts, the worse it becomes for this individual. And imagine now an entire workforce or an entire team or a community of people in an organization reacting in this way to a rumor. And this is a real situation that happens very often in many of the organizations we work with. And so one of the things you'll recognize happens is this flight, fight, or freeze response. Some employees, after a certain number of months, they see transformations, technology implementation happening. They have no additional information or communication to add context to this fear. So the fear grows. And so people react. They either stay, keep their heads down, they freeze, they become unproductive, or they decide, okay, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to look for another job, and they flee. Or they may decide, I'm going to fight against this. They start to resist the change. They start to push back. They start to become barriers to implementation. So if I can create enough disruption to this implementation, maybe it'll fail and I can then keep my job. And so these are very real reactions that we see in organizations that happen. And as you know, the cortisol is the stress hormone. And the longer a person has this cortisol, the more impact it could have, detrimental impacts to health and body. So this can affect people on an individual level as well as on an organizational level. So one of the things that we do to address this fear factor, which is something that we face very often when we're in an organization, we start to connect to the fear, basically to label it, to give it a name, and to connect to the fear. So what does this mean? Let me give you an example of a story. My daughter, when she was about 4 years old, she had this incredible fear that something was living under her bed. So bedtime was a nightmare. She didn't want to go to sleep. There was something under her bed, a monster that was going to eat her. And we tried everything to get her to fall asleep. Now, after we tried everything, convincing her that it's not going to happen, there was nothing there, showing her under the bed, visual information, none of it worked because she had a belief system in place and a fear that was stronger than the fact. And so one day I sat down with her before bedtime and I said, look, let's give this monster a name. What's its name? And she said, Harry. Okay, Harry. So let's talk about Harry. I told her to describe Harry. Harry as a creature, how it looked, what kind of facial features, what color it was, what kind of powers Harry had. And we came up with an entire backstory for Harry. Harry was living under the bed because he got thrown out of his home because he was so ugly. And so he had nowhere else to go. And if we threw him out, he'd be out on the streets. Suddenly, this uncertainty, this unknown fear, this element became familiar. It became we labeled it and it became something tangible. And when it's something tangible, it's less fearful. And so every night before bed, she would say good night to Harry. Harry, don't disturb me while I sleep because I need my rest. Good night, Harry. And she would go to bed. Now, this same concept works in organizations. When you address the fear, you approach people within the organization or within teams to say, yes, there is transformation happening. Yes, there may be layoffs as a result. Here's how you can get involved with the process. Here's what's going to happen in the next few months. This is where you can provide feedback and engage with us. This creates a sense of, it basically connects people to that fear element and it reduces the severity of the fear. And this is one of the approaches that we use to manage the fear in transformation. Now, fear as an element or as an emotion can push people to behave in ways that's extremely detrimental to digital transformation and technology implementations. And I'm sure everyone in this group has experienced this in some form or other, specifically within teams that are leading these transformations or involved in them, right? It could seem like these behaviors are almost, I come across these behaviors almost on every project that I work on in any organization. It doesn't matter what industry, because human beings, fundamentally, we have the same element of fear. So if I give you an example with groupthink of how groupthink has impacted us recently, we were working with a company where we had, they were interested in implementing generative AI as a solution for one of the teams. So we engaged with the company, we looked at what kind of business value it could derive and went into the specifics of the business requirements, use cases, and really came up with a strong use case that we could implement. And we were at the point of evaluating tech solutions. And as you know, Gen AI, the market has exploded today. There's so many tools out there in the market. And so we had a range of options of things that we could look at. And we had promoted, or we had suggested the evaluation process, how we can go about finding the right tool for the company. IT, on the other hand, had one specific tool that they were familiar with, and that was the only solution for them. So where groupthink came into play was the business side, or the business teams agreed with IT and said, we'll just go with what IT has decided, because if IT suggests, it must be the best. Right? And so the influence of that IT team in terms of, we know tech, you have to listen to us, and this groupthink element came into play. And also cognitive bias, because the IT team were biased against the technologies they were not familiar with. They were only looking at one specific tech. And so it took a certain amount of communication and engagement with our various IT team, showing them different technologies and capabilities, and making that fear of this unknown factors familiar to them, and allowing them then to open up in kind of the time span, or within their own time span, allowing them to open up options and say, let's look at different options, or let's find 2 or 3 that we're comfortable with so we can explore further. And part of that relates to basically labeling the fear and making sure that people understand it isn't something that you need to avoid, but it's something that needs a certain amount of exploration. So this is these are some strategies that we typically use or in our engagements that tend to be very effective in managing the human side, right? The fear factor and the relating behaviors that come from this human side of transformation. Purpose and values is a big one. I'm not going to go into details because the EXO community is very familiar. This relates to MTPs, basically having a massive transformative purpose or alignment to values has a huge impact in terms of how people engage and how people can be driven towards the same objective. I want to reiterate, though, that it does link very much to a lot of what we do within organizations, because when you have this MTP defined and engagement or emotional connection to that MTP, it does touch on a very intrinsic motivation within human beings. It looks at this long-term pleasure, the brain really looking at, this creates pleasure. I can connect to something bigger than me. It takes the focus away from current challenges, current fears and situations that I as an individual might have, and puts my focus on something bigger. So I move the scale away from fear towards pleasure. And it does connect from an organization perspective to every element that we build from there. So values, visions, goals, operating model, as well as the customer value propositions. So it's really central to what we do as well. The second element is around building digital cultures, right? So this is a really interesting one. And here I'd like to go into maybe some of the newer elements or parts that you may not have seen before. So when we talk about change management in a company, we often talk about communication plans, we talk about training plans, we talk about engaging with teams and engaging with people around how this transformation or change might impact them and what can be done, communications around that, and so on. The difference here is what we do is focus on building digital culture rather than building change management. So digital culture can be defined as actions, behaviors, mindsets, values that that are shaped by the use of technology, right? So basically, emerging technologies, digital technology solutions shaping the way we think, interact, and communicate with one another in the workplace. Now, when it's implemented very purposefully, it can drive sustainable change, it can create value, and it can drive human behavior or behavioral change. So one of the things that we really try to focus on is building this digital culture when we enter an organization to work on digital transformation. It really looks at elements of looking at the organization. So not just doing change management initiatives where, let me start again. Digital transformation initiatives or technology initiatives typically implement change management initiatives at the end, right? So you define your strategy, you develop your roadmap, you develop your initiatives, and then you define change management at the end. We start at the very beginning. We look at what your culture is today. How can we define interventions to encourage or create an environment that's going to encourage our digital transformation? And define and develop those initiatives from the very beginning and build those actions or activities into our entire digital transformation process, so end-to-end phases. So we start at the very beginning with this human element. And we look at three specific aspects that relate to how an individual behaves and how much we can get them bought into what we're doing. So first is the psychological factor, and those are individual level factors, right? This might relate to attitudes a person might have about certain technologies or about change. It looks at my skill levels or knowledge as well as interests as an individual. What's my expectation as an individual for this technology or for the work that I do? My personal characteristics as well. I might be someone who's very familiar with technology or use it on a daily basis, or I might be someone who prefers digital detox. I only use it at work, for example. And self-efficacy in terms of how do I view my ability to learn and develop and grow? All of these elements create this psychological or individual factor that can change or that can transform my behavior as an individual. And so one of the things that we focus on for that individual level is, of course, to create the MTP, to create this higher purpose. Once you have this higher purpose, it's easier for people to connect, and it's easier to look away from the fear and to look away from uncertainties or change that might be created by transformation initiatives and focus on something bigger or something more meaningful. The second element is, of course, communication, right? And communication here, I'm referring to something very specific, not in terms of the traditional change management communication where you put together a comms plan and you define specific timeframes when information would go out and how this information would flow. But it looks at a communication that focuses on shifting mindsets and shifting attitudes. And so here, the communication is very simplistic. It's very visually engaging. It also engages on a multi-sensory level, so different formats, different styles, but it engages on an emotional level. The communication has to touch the emotions, either openly addressing your fears, being transparent about what could change. Yes, you might have to learn a new skill to use this technology. You might need 3 months to upgrade your skills, but also offering elements that create pleasure. But once you learn that skill, you might have more opportunity to get promoted in the company. You might have more opportunity to engage across the entire organization. You might have the opportunity to learn more things that could be interesting for your career progression. And so you create this communication that touch upon this fear and pleasure elements. Now, you have to be very careful with communication because, we're often told you have to communicate facts and data to convince people. And we're seeing a lot of that at the moment with the US elections as well, where news channels are trying to show facts about the economy and changes that have happened. And you're trying to convince people who have a certain belief that change needs to happen, that they have to vote a certain way. The same thing happens in organizations. We often have communication that goes out during digital transformation where we say, past initiatives or other use cases have been successful. We've implemented this in other companies and it's really good. The companies have delivered 10 times their revenue, 10 times potential revenue and all of that. Now, facts are a fine line when it comes to dealing with the emotional brain. Too much facts can actually backfire when it comes to communication. So this is something called belief perseverance. When you have facts that contradict what I believe as a human being, let's say I am in this fear mode, cortisol released, I am not able to be productive, I'm too worried about losing my job or having to learn something new and I don't know if I can do it. And you come to me with a whole set of facts and data and information, I will push against it even more. And this belief perseverance will tell me, no, my information, my fact, my knowledge is the one I'm going to believe. And this fear is the highest importance to me right now. And so you have to be very careful with the communication and ensure that you're addressing that fear and pleasure elements for each individual. Storytelling does this very well because storytelling connects on an emotional level to what people are feeling. So delivering your information in a storytelling mode, connecting with people on an emotional level, telling them why this is going a certain way, what could happen for them, how they are part of that journey, and delivering this information in a story actually is incredibly effective. The fourth element for an individual is really psychological safety, and I can't stress this enough. As a team that goes into an organization to engage with the team, with the client teams, and to deliver a new technology or an innovation outcome, it's so important to create this sense of psychological safety. And there's so many studies and data that communicate psychological safety actually drives increased innovation. And so you have to create an environment where people feel like they can learn, they can engage with one another, they feel included, that they can contribute as well as they can challenge the situation, right? Provide feedback, to create feedback mechanisms. Now, I've seen many times consultants in organizations, they walk in, they go into a closed door with the leadership, they have their little engagements or they have workshop sessions, and you have employees on the floor who watch them come and go, but have no idea what's happening. They don't feel psychologically safe. They feel like these consultants coming in are a threat. And I know this because we engage with the client teams on a human level, and they share these experiences with us. And so making sure that you create an environment that's not exclusive, that is creating an inclusive environment that's open for dialogue, even as an external, even as a consultant, it's so important to have that sort of engagement in the teams. The second element is the social factors, right? So beyond the individual factors, you have the social factors that create digital culture. And this is really about the social influence or the groups or teams that you're part of. It could be the communities in the organization. It could be working groups, task force, whatever your team structures are. All of these create a certain sense of community dynamic, and it creates the social norms as well as cultures within the organization. And here, this is such an important factor to understand. We have to dial up our social brain in order to effectively address these social factors or sociological factors. And the social brain is really this. We as human beings, we are wired, we are hard-coded to connect with one another. This is what we are built to do, right? We are designed to be part of a community, and we're designed to connect with one another. And we have a social brain network, which are parts of the brain that are connecting together and basically managing how we interact with one another. And this is such an important element to understand. Part of this is also a hormone called oxytocin in our brain. And the more we connect with one another, the more this hormone is released in our brain, and that encourages further connections. Now, this is such a cool element to see because there are simple ways to make sure oxytocin is released in the brain that increases connections to human beings. And oxytocin, by the way, is also the hormone that is released when a mother gives birth to her baby that allows her to connect with the baby on a very emotional level. And so turning up this oxytocin is actually really easy. And when you turn this up, you can actually connect with people in a much easier way. The first thing is eye contact. When you look at someone in the eye for a few seconds, it releases oxytocin in the brain, and that increases your ability as well as it encourages you as a human to connect with the other person. The other thing is gentle touch. When you touch someone, there are actually sensors on our body that encourage us to, or encourages this oxytocin release in our brain. And the third element is, of course, taking proteins. Now, how do you apply this? Of course, I'm not telling you to go out and, stare everyone in the eye and touch people in the workplace, right? So there's ways that we utilize this. Eye contact is really cool. So let's say before I go into a very important meeting with clients, I look at someone, a partner or, a family member, I look at them in the eye and basically helps to release the oxytocin in my brain. And when I enter into this meeting, if I'm talking to the groups, I make sure that I rest my eye on each individual in the room as I greet them and as I talk to them. And this releases, again, oxytocin. And if you don't have a partner at home, if you have a pet, you can look at the pet. It works the same way. If you stare at your dog, it releases oxytocin as well. And I found this hugely effective. It sounds a little bit silly, but it's hugely effective and it works. The other element is proteins, right? So eating proteins in the morning. So let's say you're running an innovation workshop or an awareness session in the morning. Have a little bit of a spread where people can come and have a high protein meal before they come into the session. The protein releases dopamine and serotonin in the brain, and it creates this better mood, or it creates this happiness feeling where people make better decisions and they're more open to innovation. So these small tricks can actually help engage with social teams and engage with the environment better. Now, the second element is the brain synchrony. And this is a very, very important one that we use very often in the work that we do. So synchrony is basically when you have good relationships with someone, your brain literally starts to synchronize with them. And what this means is your brain activity and the brain pattern of activity synchronizes. And this also then synchronizes your physiological reaction. So your breathing tends to synchronize when you have a good relationship with someone. Your heart rate synchronizes as well when you have a really good relationship. And so all of these elements then creates or promotes team chemistry. It creates a feeling of trust and closeness as well as teamwork. So this is hugely, hugely important because we can actually simulate this brain synchrony by synchronizing our physiological actions or our movement. We see this with the military, right? So we have military groups or companies that tend to march together, march in synchrony. And when you have this body movement that's synchronized, your brain also starts to synchronize. The brain activity starts to synchronize. Your physiological breathing and your reaction to that, everything starts to synchronize. And this is why we see, for example, also teams that are rowing. You see the rowing teams practicing even outside of water in the gym with the rowing machines. They do it in synchrony because it synchronizes and it creates this team chemistry that increases trust and increases teamwork. And so we can simulate this as well. You see this, for example, with workshop sessions where sometimes teams do, or workshop facilitators do this breathing exercises together, or they do dancing together. This actually has a reaction in human beings where it creates an environment where people feel closer together and a feeling of trust. It synchronizes the brain pattern and you can actually work better together. So before going into an innovation workshop or doing a session with teams, we often build in an exercise where people are doing something in synchrony to simulate this brain synchrony. And that has a huge impact in terms of the outcome. People walk out of those sessions really commenting to us how impactful that was and how great they feel and how they feel included and part of this group. And so, for example, we at the beginning of our digital transformation, we typically run culture workshops to map the current culture, or we run workshops for pain storming, where we try to identify common pain factors or pain elements across different teams. And we include these brain synchrony exercises at the beginning, and people feel this sense of camaraderie and this shared experience. When they walk out, they really have a closer relationship, even though they're teams that may have existed in the same organization for years. The final piece is really around environmental factors. And this is looking at how do you create digital culture within an organization across the physical space that you're in. And so we try to encourage companies that we work with to create brain healthy workspaces, or workspaces that have the human element at the center of it. And what this means is basically different kinds of workspaces or different kinds of locations that encourage different kinds of activities or align with different activities. So some areas to focus on, some areas for ideation and exploration, other areas for collaboration, co-creation, rest and reflection, as well as social connection, making sure that we're able to connect with people. And oftentimes, we don't actually ask companies to create these spaces. Those spaces exist, but we do use them in the way that they were meant for. So let's say we enter an organization to do a digital transformation project or to design or develop a strategy. And what we do is then identify which is the space where people go for social connection. It could be the coffee area, it could be the cafeteria. And so we integrate ourselves into that space and start creating some social brain activities. Or we could go into a space that is conducive for collaboration. This could also be an online space where we bring people together and we engage with them with activities that actually allow them to then co-create and design together. And we also then do allow or do request that there are certain spaces where you can go and reflect and rest. The key is really allowing people within the different teams to find a balance. So moving between these spaces in the day and not staying within one space, because that truly encourages innovation. The final piece is really to share with you, we have this digital transformation framework that we use, and this was, I designed this based on my own experience of working with organizations over the years, and it helps to accelerate digital transformation within organizations. But what we've done is really looked at each of these phases and built in these human elements that can help drive transformation across and basically make it an easier process or a less complex process. So for example, under situational analysis, where we try to understand the current environment of the organization and the business and the industry, we build in elements like I mentioned earlier, brainstorming and culture mapping, where we bring people together and really try to engage with them, bring them very early on as part of the transformation process so they understand what's happening. But it's also quite important to make sure that these same people are then continuously informed as the project progresses as well. We try to create synchrony across all of these elements. Within disruptive visioning, we use NTP quite often, but we also use storytelling and create compelling visuals to encourage our emotional communication. And of course, create across the board an environment of psychological safety. So when I go into an organization, I'm fully aware that I want people to approach me and talk to me, and I want to become part of that organization and not an external factor that has to be feared what the outcome could be for their career, for example. And so we really try to create this environment of psychological safety, authenticity, and honesty across the entire process. So all of these elements are available on in my book, The Human Side of Digital Business Transformation. But I've also designed 2 separate courses, which is available on the Digital Transformation School. So you can actually deep dive into these aspects and really go into the methodologies and frameworks. And it offers you a step-by-step guide on how to implement these transformation initiatives with the human element at the center. Thank you so much for your attention.
Excellent, Kamalis. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for presenting. There was a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge into that. We have a few people here, so I'm going to open it up for questions for the next 10 minutes. And maybe I thought to kick off with one question. I'll be really curious what you think, Kamalis. I'm going to share something. This is a post that was made on LinkedIn by a friend of mine, and he kind of gave me a pause, right? So he says like there is these like 3 stages of work. AI helps me to do the work, I help AI do the work, and then AI does the work, right? And he said that in his own work, he's now basically moved from stage 1 to stage 2. He feels that it's much more that, you know, he's actually helping AI do the work rather than AI helping him to do the work, right? So taking like everything that you've said, like I can see how this apply to like maybe like regular technology, but when I think of AI and this being the sequence, like what is actually the place for the human beings, if we are moving alongside that sequence? I would be curious what you think of this. Is AI the same as any other technology, or is it different? And then if it is different, and maybe if it's a little bit like what is here on the screen, what do you think is actually the ultimate destination for humans, and what are we going to do? Curious what you think.
Before I answer, I want to make sure that I heard the first part correctly. So first, he said AI.
Can you see the screen?
No, I can't see the screen.
You cannot see the screen?
There we go. Okay, AI helps me do the work.
Yeah.
I help you do the work. So there's two aspects here, just off the top of my head, right? So what he's describing is a learning process for AI, right? Because AI helps him, then I help AI, and then finally AI learns the job and does the work. So I think this is a natural progression that we're going to see with any kind of artificial intelligence type capability, where it's learning and eventually it'll hit a point where it's going to take over from us or take over, I would say, up to 70% easily of what we're doing today in our daily business. And it depends on how, the second part is depends on how organizations are going to be using AI. The number of conversations I've had with senior leadership and board members where they say, we can replace X number of people with AI, alarms me. Because I'm a big believer I'm a technology optimist. I love the burst and explosion AI has had in the industry. And I think it's necessary. There's so much good that can come out of it for humanity. But in the same breath, I think companies are limiting their view when they say, we're going to replace people with AI, not only because of the factors around, needing oversight, the factors around the diversity aspects and the impact on the human value, but I think the role that when we need to look at for human beings is we are the center of business. At the end of the day, why does a business exist? Businesses are not going to sell services and products to AI. They're going to sell to people. Right? At the end of the day, human beings are still at the core. And if you're using technology in the right way, what we tend to do with organizations is we have a 3-step approach. We look at your organization structure, we look at the current business environment, and we try to understand, or we look at where you can apply artificial intelligence as a tech solution. For me, it's not different. It is like any other emerging technology. You would look at what the business wants to achieve: cost reduction, efficiency, growth and scale, risk management, right? Productivity, whatever it may be. These are your elements that measure success of a business. We try to identify where's your biggest problem or where's your biggest challenge at the moment. Okay, if growth and scale is a challenge, how can AI deliver towards growth and scale? Is AI the solution for it, first of all? If it is, how can it deliver? And then start designing use cases that deliver towards growth and scale. And that allows us to stick very closely to the business value. The second element is looking at your general workforce. The workforce is going to shift with AI, right? And this shift is going to happen whether we like it or not. But it's going to be the companies that understand you have to create a highly skilled workforce that's going to work side by side with AI as a tool and as a peer. This means your entire organization needs to upskill on some basic knowledge around AI, data literacy, application of the technology, how it's going to impact the business. This your entire workforce needs to have as a basic knowledge. Then you have a second layer of workforce upskilling where you have people who are going to be using these systems or going to be part of these systems, so very much closely integrated with these systems. This is a second layer of education. They might need deeper, so it might be the same kind of training, but maybe at a deeper level or more expert level. And then you have this top layer of people who are going to be expert users of AI, this skill-based or role-based training, where you have to identify the people who are really going to utilize the systems, who are going to be creating with the systems. And that comes back to your friend, where AI is going to do their work, but you still need to have oversight to what work is being done. You have to have this ethics view, this diversity view to ensure that the work is done in a human positive way. And this is the top layer. And so I think this approach of many companies to replace people with AI is short-sighted, because there's going to be a time when companies start looking for the human resource again and say, hey, we've gone too far with AI, we need people back again.
Excellent. Thank you very much for a thorough answer, Kamalis. So we have Steve, we have Dale, Alderico, Mag, and Thomas. So open to your questions. Any questions you want to ask, Kamalis? Steve, you look like you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Yaroslav.
Go for it.
Thank you, Kamalis, for this excellent presentation. I have a question regarding culture. What do you do when you come across an organization where the organization's structure has so much influence on the culture? Specifically, an organization where you have a very hierarchical organization with a top-down approach to decision making. How do you address that?
So when you say how do you address that, you're referring to implementing innovation or implementing, yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a great question, and there are actually many organizations out there that are still very structural, or we see that already with companies that were not expecting to see that. So companies that are telling employees to come back to work physically 5 days a week. There's no more remote work, right? So these are some of these examples of companies that may not appear hierarchical, but actually are at the end of the day. And so what I typically do is, I think the fact or the element that I didn't address in my presentation, but it's such a crucial element, is the leadership team. And when I work with organizations, it's typically with the leadership team or the board members. They bring us in and say, we need to look at transformation, or we need to look at a strategy. And the leadership team is crucial in setting that tone, right? If you have a very hierarchical organization structure, it's going to be very difficult to implement transformation. Particularly, a big part of the human side of digital requires empowerment of employees, empowerment of people in different levels of the organization. So this is a mindset shift. So one of two things that I typically do when we talk to the leadership team, we assess if there is an appetite for change. And we make it very clear, once again, addressing the fear or connecting to the fear. Leadership teams are generally afraid that they might become displaced, they might lose control, they might lose their they might have 40 years of experience of doing things, but only doing it in a certain way. So they might not be able to learn new skills, for example, or they might not be able to lead in a very technologically advanced company. So these are all human elements of fear. And so we try through conversation to identify where the fear is or what the fear is. And this requires a certain amount of tactical empathy. Listening, understanding, asking the right questions, really listening, engaging to listen and understand. And once you have these types of conversations, it comes out very quickly whether there's a fear but an appetite for change, or a fear and doing initiatives that are just for show. And I have actually told some leadership teams, okay, you're not ready for change or transformation. Maybe let's not address this. Let's not do this project, or let's do something smaller. Let's tackle a smaller piece to demonstrate or to give you time to transform. So I've had actually situations where I've had to kind of step back because we are really not in the business of trying to change people too quickly. I think that takes a certain amount of time to have mindset shift, and people have to be ready for that mindset shift. So my response would really be, you have to have that conversation and use tactical empathy to really understand what those fear factors are, because transformation requires this hierarchical structure to be dispersed or to be shifted. Otherwise, this innovation will not be able you won't be able to implement it, basically. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kamalis, just a follow-up question on this. Have you seen, for example, an organization that doesn't have much digital technology and starts with a hierarchical structure, but then through the implementation, actually it changes the structure itself because it changes how people operate? Have you seen something like that?
So one of the clients that we worked with in the African region, we've worked with them now for about 5 years. So the only variable or the only aspect I would say is it takes time for the change to happen. So when we first started working with them in 2019, they brought us in for digital transformation strategy. They were very, very digitally, digital maturity was very low. At that point, they were just implementing their first mobile app. That was their digital level. So that wasn't very advanced. But back then we developed the strategy and we said a big part of what you need to do is culture change, right? Because your culture is hierarchical. They had a new CEO come in. The previous CEO who had managed for over a decade was extremely hierarchical and extremely directive. And so the culture was built around that mode. People don't speak up. They do as they're told. And the new CEO who came in was from a consulting background. And so he was more, open and wanted to kind of break these structures. But even then, the management team that worked with him, the executive management and the management committee basically said, you know what, we are not ready for culture. We don't really need this. So that was in 2019. Now, fast forward to 2022, after COVID hit, their digital initiatives were incredibly successful, but they found that it was difficult. They were facing the same barriers over and over again. They had higher costs. They had challenges, communication between different team members. Leadership was not delegating to their direct reports. And so there were many challenges that indicated the culture needed to shift in order for these technology projects to implement faster. So in 2021-22, we basically said, let's look at the culture initiative again. And this time, leadership has to be part of those initiatives. You don't delegate it, but you are in the room. We created work streams, communication work streams, collaboration work streams, and so on. And the leadership, so executive management led each of those work streams and engaged in each of the sessions, what should be done, how we can create effective interventions, how we can implement the culture change. So that has been hugely impactful. We have seen the results of that.
That's great. I really like how you really kind of focus on the human side and make sure that it really complements, because that's really kind of make or break many times. Let's go to Dale and Max.
I think it's very, very important to timing is important. You can't push people to change because then it backfires. And so one of the things we learned is making sure that we pushed it at the beginning, it wasn't going to fly. And so we waited for them to kind of realize almost that we need this. And so they came back to it.
Yeah, great. That's excellent. Alderico, question.
Thank you, Kamalis. Thank you for your presentation. Very, very interesting. Sorry, I lost. I missed a part of the presentation because I had a customer's call, so I wasted 20 minutes. But I want to ask you this. I worked for a long time for more than 25 years in international project, leading CRM and especially ERP system with IBM and Oracle in North America, South America, Asia, and especially in Europe. I think that you have to consider also that every kind of group of people is totally different. They have a different approach to the leadership. They have different approach to the work group, and also for the especially for example North America or some Asian, if they work with the process, so a lot of instruction, like for example, if you have to go out from this room, you have to walk till to the door, you have to open the door and you have to go out. If the door is open, German, American, and other one, maybe they don't go out because there is the instruction to open the door. And this happened because in my work life happened a lot of times. Different is for Latin. Italian are already out because there is a big difference between Latin and many other people, because Latin work on why, okay, and other people in how, think about how. And it's a totally different point of view. So it's very difficult to create a standard methodology to manage this kind of work group. So you have to create different kind of model, this different kind of approach, because a little change can be good or very bad for the project. So I want to ask you if you consider this kind of difference that are very focused in many group of people, and how to apply it in general, of course.
Great.
That's an excellent question. And absolutely, this is one of the biggest challenges that we faced initially around working with global organizations. And we've had projects in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and this culture aspect. And it's not just the organizational culture, but it's the people culture. It's also the cultural norms, social norms. All of these play a huge role. And we've had our faux pas as well, stepping into it and maybe even upsetting people. But the aspects that I've presented today, that this is why it's different, because it addresses the human side from the neuroscience perspective, basically from the biology of human beings. And at a biology level, all of us are similar. The aspect is around looking at what are the elements that bring pleasure or joy or keep you safe or you perceive as safe, and what are the aspects that you perceive as fearful or a threat to your survival, right? These aspects. The interpretation comes then when we look at individual organizations or teams that we're working with and the cultures. That's when we translate that into digital culture, where we look at individual or psychological aspects, the socio-logical aspects, as well as the environmental aspects. And within the sociological aspects, that's when we start to address elements around what is your social norm? Is this team from Latin America? What do they perceive as a fear? What would they perceive as pleasure or joy, right? And there are some teams, for example, that might perceive financial incentives as a positive. Other teams might perceive financial incentives as a bribe or as a way for management to basically keep them quiet while they make a change. And we've experienced this as well. And so we approach these transformation initiatives with the human side more from a human biology level, and really try to define, based on your cultural norms, your social norms, your individual aspect, as well as your environmental aspect, how can we design initiatives that can create behavior or drive behavior to encourage digital transformation. So that was the concepts that I was trying to present today. It comes away from traditional change management. You cannot, in the number of times I've seen companies take a change management plan that's developed at a central team and implement it across countries, it's painful to see that. And so what we do is we try to actually look at the individual and the team, as well as the organization culture and environment from a different perspective. So hopefully that answers your question. I hope that you look at or you watch the rest of the presentation, Alderico.
Yes, of course.
We were already connecting to watch the recording. Excellent. Just conscious of time, but Dale or Mac, do you have a question?
No, just a quick comment. And Kamalis, I just sent you an invite on LinkedIn. We need to talk offline. And we have an initiative inside OpenExO called Exponential Individuals, which takes into consideration that exponential organization is built by exponential individuals. And to become an exponential individual, you need to be self-aware, you need to be human optimized by technology, and then connect to the collectivity around you. The organization can be considered one of them. So I saw that you took an approach from the organization's point of view, the human side from the organization's point of view, and we went from the other way around. So the human side from the individual perspective, where should I go? Where can I go? Where I want to be as an individual. I'm the one that decides. So this is something that might be maybe another 30 minutes of talking. So not posing something, but just a quick comment. I think that we have something in common to talk about.
Thank you, Mac. I look forward to that. Definitely.
Great. And just quickly, Kamalis, thanks very much.
Thank you.
For your presentation. I was just wondering, what has surprised you? Is there anything that has surprised you in doing this work in terms of what's effective or what works or what didn't work?
That's a great question, actually. What surprised me it's very intuitive. And so this for me was really, it was a good feedback to get, right? I think the biggest surprise that I had in doing this work is how simple it is and how easy it is to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned in the presentation, simple eye contact,
Mm-hmm.
very purposeful interaction, tactical empathy, listening to listen and understand rather than listening to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very simple elements that can have a huge impact. Another example I can give you as well, Dale, in observing one reinsurance company that we worked with, observing kind of the kind of team structure and the behavioral norms, we were really trying to engage the workforce in the different teams, trying to get them on board. And we started to notice, I noticed actually that they were very much engaged in the cafeteria with the person working in the cafeteria, the guy who runs the cafeteria, not part of the teams or the workforce or the daily business, just the person running the cafeteria. And he was almost the central influence of the team chemistry.
Yep.
Because he knew everyone, he'd been there for 30 years.
Yep.
So I went up to him and started a conversation and basically engaged with him on a very empathetical level and started telling him about our project and why we were there. And it was tough as an external, it's tough sometimes. We have to come into new environments and try to fit in. And it was amazing because he started telling the teams about us. Hey, this consulting lady's here. You should talk to her. She's doing something interesting. That was the project turnaround for us. People started to approach us and say, "Oh yeah, I heard about you from so and so, and we need to talk. We need to talk. Let's have a coffee."
Yeah,
the human element.
that's great. That's great. I call that the social glue guy.
Yeah,
There's one guy who's a connector that people resonate with, and sometimes it is the janitor or the guy in the cafeteria. But you can find them pretty easily by just asking people. Who's a really trusted resource or who's a central player, regardless of the position. It's usually not in the line of authority.
It's not the leadership usually.
But that's a great insight. Thank you for sharing that. That's really
I actually know someone, they actually make these quite complex maps of these social dynamics in companies.
Yep.
They have a special software and they basically ask everybody a question and then they visualize it into quite a complex thing. And then you can actually see like these are the key people to shift the dynamic because these are the people that everybody is looking up to, right? And maybe sometimes intuitively, but they actually can put it into software and just visualize it. It's quite cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, very, very powerful. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, Kamalis, we kept you for 10 minutes longer. So thank you so much for spending that time, for sharing with us. And maybe again, where people can find you. So you have a website, you have courses, right, that people can take. And also you have 2 books. Is that a good summary?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It has been a pleasure presenting here today. So you can find me on LinkedIn and we have a website, lardipartner.com, or our online courses are on dbxschool.com. And my books, so The Human Side of Digital Transformation is on Audible and Amazon. And my new book, AI in Business, will be coming out early next year. But pre-orders are available. So.
Perfect. And the courses, because I took one, the courses are actually done by a digital version of Kamalis. So it's quite a
but it's very good.
it's quite an interesting thing. Excellent. All right. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Kamalis, and all the best with our digital changes out there.
Great. And thank you, Doris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.